We have brand new evidence of our greatness here on the Monty Show, which is to say, that was probably a little, overcompensating, if you will. But Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State, a villain to be sure in Pac-12 circles, a guy that's a wonderful administrator on the academic side and should have no oversight of sports because he just is lost in the wilderness. Talked a lot about the demise of the Pac-12. And remember what we've reported on this show, because two really important facts came out today. One, without doubt, Oregon and Washington never went to the 7 a.m. meeting on the Friday the Pac-12 died, which we reported on this show exclusively. And everybody said we were full of BS. And the guys at Washington were like, hey, who's telling you that? Mind you, they never denied it. But we told you, hey, Oregon and Washington never went to that meeting. But I think one of the more interesting parts of this Michael Crow story is that he talked openly about the Apple deal and the setup of the Apple deal and just how naive Michael Crow, the president, is. Naive too strong on this?
No, I think it's as if dude has never heard of the terminology known as streaming.
It's remarkable. Why don't we start with the Friday meeting and how the Pac-12 died? Arizona State President Michael Crow talking to Arizona Sports 98.7 in Phoenix about that now infamous Friday meeting.
Friday morning, last week, 7 a.m. We're all supposed to get together and be ready to roll, rock and roll. Well, two schools don't show up. I'm like, that's not good. That could mean the Pac-12 is being threatened. I mean, it really meant that. It really meant that it was done at that point. That meeting ended right before 8. And by 10:30, I was meeting with the commissioner of the Big 12 and 3 of the presidents. Now, just imagine that.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't just happen.
Right.
And then later that afternoon, they accepted our desire to join them, and we next year will be a part of that conference.
Well, that's not good. Oh, you mean that Oregon and Washington were not in the meeting? Hey, has anybody talked to Oregon and Washington? They're like 5 minutes late. Yeah, they're not coming, Coach. Unbelievable. And then the absolute, I don't even know if the word is ridiculousness, or I think what Arizona State President Michael Crow says right here about streaming is one of the scariest things. And really, it should be heartbreaking. Maybe that's the right word. Heartbreaking that we've heard come out of a Pac-12 mouthpiece, because it shows you this deal with Apple was never getting done.
So basically what the Apple deal was Apple would spend $500 million in the first year to take all the football games, all the men's basketball games, and all the women's basketball games in the Pac-12, digitally capture them and make them available to everyone. And you could play the games whenever you wanted to play them. That's a huge, huge, huge thing. And all of the data from those games would be available. So you could zoom in on Mike Broomhead, the player. You could zoom in on, great plays. You could be watching all the games at the same time if you wanted. There was going to be a fee for that, and that was the big uncertainty. And then a guarantee of a certain price, a certain income to the schools, and then a joint partnership going forward of anything above the guarantee would be a 50-50 split. So from my perspective, you kept the Pac-12 together as a regional conference. You move towards the broader football championship now, which now is going to have 8 teams instead of 4 teams. And that meant that the conferences would really be there. And then you'd have this whole new way to broadcast digitally all of your content. Most of us thought that was a pretty good deal, including me.
Really? That's I mean, I've never heard of that outside of every streaming platform in the world.
That's the untrained eye.
It really is. It's amazing to me when you listen to Mike. That's the president at Arizona State. Like one of the leading, thought process guys in education in the entire country, Michael Crow, explaining this new thing that nobody's ever heard of called streaming. It's remarkable. It's beyond belief that this dude seemingly has never heard of streaming. And he's talking about that you're going to take every football game, every basketball game, everything, and we're going to put it on a website, and you can go and watch it. And you can go and watch it. Like, and it'll be there on repeat too. That's called YouTube, sir.
Hey guys.
We get it. We know what it is, bro. But what did we tell you brought down this conference? The old heads who don't understand technology.
Keep it real.
The old heads who don't want to go to YouTube, who don't want streaming. Those are ultimately the reasons that this conference died. And Jake, I think this is an exact articulation, a visible and verbal confirmation that the old heads killed the Pac-12.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it's incredible to me that we're in a situation where you have this guy, you know, it may be a bit strong to say he's making a fool of himself, but it's just shocking that you can't just simply say, yeah, it was a streaming deal. Like, you're trying to sit here, and it's almost as if he was like, all right, so I'm going to do this interview, and I'm going to repackage the term streaming, and I'm going to describe it as this new and innovative technology where all of your games are uploaded. Notice he didn't say they were live streamed. Hey, they're uploaded, and you can zoom in on people, and you can play any game you want at any time, and that was huge. Like we've known this, and so, yeah, I do think the old head in the Pac-12 crushed the Pac-12. I do think from George Kliavkoff across the board, they crushed the Pac-12. And what's really funny about it is it's amazing how the old head that likes sports and really values sports, even though he's a doctor, even though he's got a PhD and he's this really smart guy in Bobby Robbins, it's amazing how that old head took ASU and Utah and took them to a better conference that embraces all of this type of thing. And so that's why I say the days of no YouTube and we're not going to stream and that's just not valuable, those days are over. They're absolutely over.
Yeah, and I'm going to play it again. I think it's worth playing it again, and I know it's 1 minute and 12 seconds, which seems like an eternity, especially when you're listening to this dude. But this is Michael Crow, and I feel like he's sitting in a room with like a bunch of other people, and they're like, hey, man, can you hurry up? Our shuffleboard game is going to tip off in like 10 minutes. And they're like old folks who don't watch anything ever. Mm-hmm. And he's like, okay, well, there's this new technology. I cannot believe that the president of Arizona State is breaking down what amounts to streaming like this.
So basically what the Apple deal was is Apple would spend $500 million in the first year to take all the football games, all the men's basketball games, and all the women's basketball games in the Pac-12, digitally capture them and make them available to everyone. And you could play the games whenever you wanted to play them. That's a huge, huge, huge thing. And all of the data from those games would be available. So you could zoom in on Mike Broomhead, the player. You could zoom in on, great plays. You could be watching all the games at the same time if you wanted. There was going to be a fee for that, and that was the big uncertainty, and then a guarantee of a certain price, a certain income to the schools, and then a joint partnership going forward of anything above the guarantee would be a 50-50 split. So from my perspective, you kept the Pac-12 together as a regional conference. You move towards the broader football championship now, which now is going to have 8 teams instead of 4 teams. And that meant that the conferences would really be there. And then you'd have this whole new way to broadcast digitally all of your content. Most of us thought that was a pretty good deal, including me.
This whole new way. This whole new way to broadcast your content digitally, bro. It's unbelievable.
I just can't believe the guy. It's almost like, dude, it's almost like the insurance commercials that are on TV where it's like, hey, what is a Facebook post? Or like, yeah, there's like these, it's just incredible, man. Like, I don't know. I don't know what these individuals do during their day, but clearly they are not in the mainstream. And clearly they have no idea what the capability of, obviously YouTube, but all the different streaming platforms.
But he's describing Amazon Prime Sports NFL on Thursday night.
Pretty much, yeah.
Where you can zoom in on a player and it's data driven, and we get it. You can go back and watch a game anytime you want. We get it. It's bizarre to me. It just feels so. If this was 20 years ago, I would be like, holy cow. But this feels so garden variety generic. We already know.
Well, and I think it's not surprising because of where they wound up. I mean, again, this is almost for me like a cherry on top. Like everything's happened, it's all, the dust is settled, and now we get a guy in Michael Crow doing interviews, making it worse, in my opinion, because you show just your lack of knowledge and really insight, and the word he likes to use is perspective, on the current day and age and how people consume sports. Like, I just don't know how it's possible that that's the guy leading Arizona State.
It's wild. And then the other thing that was in there that I thought was interesting and confirmed by Brett McMurphy today, that George Kliavkoff used the professor at a Pac-12 university because a Pac-12 president worked with a professor on his campus who estimated the school's market value was $50 million a year. What are you, Notre Dame? So the Pac-12 based on this professor's advice, asked for $50 million a school per year.
After the envelope calculations.
What have we been reporting for the better part of 8 months on this show? That the Pac-12 asked for $500 million a year for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State, just confirmed that. And Brett McMurphy, now we know through Brett McMurphy that a Pac-12 professor valued his school at $50 million a year. So George Kliavkoff valued every Pac-12 school at $50 million a year. Wild stuff. You're asking for $500 million a year. That was the number we heard from the CW. That was the number that we heard from Amazon. That was the number that we heard from ESPN and ABC.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody said no. Everybody said no. And the worst part of the McMurphy tweet is ESPN said, we'll give you 30. And the Pac-12 said, we want 50 per school per year. ESPN said no. And the deal was never the same after that.
Nope.
Never the same after that. As we've told you for months and months, ESPN went back to the Pac-12 at that point and said, we are out on Tier 1 rights. Our number is $90 million. That's it. $90 million.
You understand how much of a contrast that is from where they were?
Man.
Like, you were asking for 50. ESPN was at 30. Then ESPN came back and said, hey, here's what it is. And that was
one
9?
game a week.
Bro.
One game a week on ESPN. Remarkable. And again, I want to remind everybody, this is self-inflicted. It never had to happen. The collapse of the Pac-12 is one of the great tragedies in American sports history. And I'm not being dramatic and I'm not being over the top. If you look at the Pac-12 and you look at this group of schools, and whether you want to point to Stanford, Cal, whoever you want to talk about, these are powerhouse academic brands, powerhouse football brands like Oregon and Washington and Utah, USC and UCLA. And by the pure naivete and stubbornness of their commissioners and just a lack of understanding of the here and now by presidents like Michael Crow, this conference suffocated itself because they wouldn't do a deal with DirecTV. They wouldn't do a deal with Amazon Prime Sports. They would not do deals that were, 50% streaming, 50% linear. They wouldn't do any of that. They didn't believe that they could be wrong.
Yeah.
And it absolutely suffocated them, and it didn't have to happen. You should be at 16 teams today in the Pac-12, and you're not because you blew your own feet off. And USC, to their credit, saw it happening and bailed.
Yep.
And UCLA went with them. And then the Four Corner schools. And then Oregon and Washington. And on and on and on. And I think one of the most fascinating parts of this Michael Crow interview on Arizona Sports 98.7 in Phoenix is he's talking about over 2 hours. We went from sitting in a meeting at 7 a.m. expecting a grant of rights to hopefully get done to 2.5 hours later, we were on a call. 3 hours later, we had accepted an invite to the Big 12.
Facts.
Just like that, the conference evaporated.
Yep.
And now here you are with these last 4 in, and I still don't know where they end up, but it's spectacular failure. Is that a way to say something like that?
I just think it is the culmination of both bad philosophy, bad theory, certainly bad execution, and I think you can only do those things for so long before you start seeing those actions and those behaviors pan out. And I think that the hard part is that if Michael Crow really, like, in his heart of hearts believes that deal was innovative and that deal was like somehow like new age technology that we hadn't seen before, maybe this conference never had a chance.
Yeah.
Maybe what we should be saying is, yeah, you know what? Like schools and universities and things, they do need to hire a bit younger cut of person. It doesn't mean that person's got to be 20 or 30 or even 40. But we can't be doing folks who are baby boomers anymore. We can't be doing the 80-year-old, 70-year-old guy anymore. That doesn't work because you're not going to survive if you don't understand technology. So if you're 80 years old and you understand YouTube and Amazon and Apple and streaming and how all that affects the linear TV market, if you understand that, great. Then be as old as you want to be. But you can't have someone running your conference, certainly, and then by extension your member institutions that don't understand it.
But I think, and this is a different show, but that's a theme in this country. We have a generation gap that a lot of people don't know how to bridge that gap. A lot of people don't understand how you get from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at the situation where Michael Crow at Arizona State is completely disconnected, it sounds to me anyway, from technology, the TV industry, and I have to believe his athletes. Does the 19-year-old football player relate to Michael Crow?
No.
Does the 19-year-old Arizona Wildcat basketball player relate to Bobby Robbins?
Now, okay, that's a great example. See, I think they would relate a little more to Bobby Robbins because Bobby Robbins appreciates sports and is very much aggressive and on the forefront. I don't think that they're best friends. I don't think that he can empathize with, a 20-year-old's viewpoint per se. But Michael Crow is this guy that just oozes of, hey, academics and rich folks versus athletes, people coming up, new age streaming. Like, it's two different worlds, man. And I think that, Bobby Robbins is older. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But at least with Bobby Robbins, I can be like, yeah, dude understands athletics. Dude understands how important they are. And furthermore, he understands what he doesn't understand. And that is, how, streaming may impact linear and may impact TV deals. And so he wants to be in a conference that's more reliable, more structured, more stable. And that's the Big 12 right now.
I just can't believe that here we are in 2023. Almost 2024. We've got 4 months left in the year.
Right.
I can't believe that there are people that sit on top of billion-dollar organizations who don't know what streaming is or how it works.
Mm-hmm.
That a guy like, I don't know, Michael Crow, because he's the one talking today, but Kirk Schultz at Washington State, the president at Washington State, I don't believe by his leadership and his words has a full grasp on how the iPhone is incredibly important to the success of sports. I don't think he understands that. I don't think these guys understand or really care to understand what a 20-year-old is thinking about. I think they want that 20-year-old to show up with an application and a certain level of ACT and SAT scores, and they want them to be financially viable as a student.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think they want. And Michael Crow in this interview, and you can find it on Twitter at Arizona Sports, but he goes on to talk about their lavish, beautiful, brand new football stadium. But again, you named it recently after a credit union and you essentially had a student and athlete revolt because it's Sun Devil Stadium. It's a legendary ASU brand that they killed for money. And I don't think Ray Anderson, the athletic director, who, again, in this interview, Michael Crow at Arizona State defended Ray Anderson. Ray Anderson is, by most people's account, the worst athletic director in the country.
Yeah.
The worst, who said a week before they went to the Big 12, we've never looked at other conferences.